Hi everyone. So welcome back. I hope you guys all had a great spring break. I hope that you guys have been adapting well to being online for the rest of the spring semester. We haven't had a lecture since before spring break. So if you haven't already seen my announcements from last week, you should have watched those guest presentations last week. So if you haven't seen those before listening to this, or make sure that you make some time this week to go back and listen to those presentations from our guest speakers. So there was one on veterinary medicine and one on osteopathic medicine. So before we start lecturing today, I just wanted to give you guys quick updates on different things, just in case, again, you guys haven't seen my announcements. So one being that your exam number 3 has been moved to March 31st. Dr. Lopez did this for you guys to be able to, adapt back and give yourselves a little bit more time to get ready for that next exam. And just so you guys know, for that exam, you do need to start at 1:30. So you must start your exam at 1:30 to get the full allotted time that you need for the exam. And it's going to be in the same format as previous exams. So make sure that you guys are logging in on March 31st right at 1:30 to start that exam to make sure you guys get the full time. And just like with our other exams, you do have 3 quizzes that are going to be due on March 30th at midnight. So again, the exam's going to be March 31st, so those quizzes are going to be due March 30th. You have 3 different quizzes, one on veterinary medicine, one on dentistry, and one on osteopathic medicine, which is what we're going to talk about today. So on Thursday, I'm going to try to do a live review on these topics so that you guys are able to ask questions through Zoom. And if you guys could also give your feedback after watching this, for those who are watching, just to make sure that everything's running well. If you have anything that you want us to improve on, let us know so we can do that for you, because if you don't let us know, we won't know to improve anything. So now that all those announcements are done, we're going to go ahead and get into osteopathic medicine, which is really important. I know the most of you guys are pre-med. So when you guys are pre-med, you're thinking about allopathic medicine, which is what we talked about again all the way at the beginning of the course. That's when we were talking about that timeline and all that stuff that you guys were really interested in, because again, most of you guys are pre-med. And so most of you guys, when you think of a pre-med student, you think of an allopathic school, which if you don't remember, that would give you an MD degree. But there are actually 2 different routes of being pre-med. And so there's allopathic medicine, which again is that MD degree, and there's also osteopathic medicine, which is a DO degree. So for osteopathic medicine, it's going to be pretty much the same requirements. So for example, you would still be taking the MCAT. That's still going to be the entrance exam that you're going to be taking. Whereas for allopathic medicine, remember you're using AMCAS, you're now going to be using ACOMAS for osteopathic medicine. So AACOMAS, ACOMAS. So that's going to be the application service that you're using to apply to osteopathic programs. And then if you look, there are only 37 schools with 20 branch campuses. So notice that that is greatly reduced compared to the number of allopathic medical schools. So there are a lot more allopathic medical schools. And the reason for that is that osteopathic medicine is still very much up and coming. There are no new programs every single year. So this, again, is a career that's still being built up. While it's already established, it's just not as established as allopathic medicine. So that's why there are a lot more allopathic medical schools. So again, you're going to be using ACOMAS, and that's going to have a start date of June. And then remember, ACOMAS is application service. So that's where everything is going, like your letters of recommendation, your MCAT score, your transcripts, your personal statement, all of those things. That's all going to go to ACOMAS, which again opens in June. You're going to see that the timeline is very similar to allopathic medicine. Just like with allopathic medicine, you wanted to have everything done in the summer. You still want to have that for osteopathic medicine as well. And so if you look here, osteopathic medicine, again, it's going to be a DO degree. You're going to be taking the MCAT. The application service you're going to be using is ACOMAS. And there's only 2 programs here in Florida. So there's Nova Southeastern University and there's LECOM Bradenton. So LECOM Bradenton, that is a branch campus. I think we mentioned this before we left for spring break, but LECOM Bradenton is actually a branch campus of the original campus, the main campus. So that is a branch campus which fully functions on its own. They have their own class, they have their own curriculum style, they have all their own things. They're completely independent. They are just still under that name. That is why it's a branch campus. And that, again, it's located in Bradenton. And then there's Nova Southeastern University, which, if you guys still remember the schools for allopathic medicine, you would have noticed that Nova also has an allopathic program. So that's something that's really unique to Nova. There are very few programs that have both an osteopathic and an allopathic program. So just to give you guys a strategy before we move on is to make sure that when you're applying smart and you're having your best strategy in mind. So if you maybe didn't score as well on your MCAT, or you didn't maybe have that GPA that you really wanted, and you're applying to both MD and DO programs, because that's something that a lot of students do, you only want to apply to one of the programs if a school does have both. So if you're applying to a school like Nova that has an osteopathic and allopathic program, you want to pick one for that school. So you can apply to both when it comes to other schools, but specifically when it comes to Nova, you don't want to apply to both allopathic and osteopathic, because that, again, remember what we're always talking about, you don't want to cast any shadow of a doubt on your application, because if the osteopathic committee finds out from the allopathic committee that you applied to both, that's now kind of casting doubt on your application. Do you really want to be a DO, or are you trying to use that program as a backup? So you can apply to MD and DO programs. Almost always, they're going to be completely separate universities or completely separate programs, so they don't have two of the same. But again, with Nova, they do have both, so they have MD and DO. So that's just a strategy for Nova specifically. When it comes to branch campuses, so for example, for LECOM, like I just said, it is a branch campus. If you wanted to apply to the LECOM, the main campus in Pennsylvania, and you wanted to apply to the LECOM branch campus in Bradenton, you would need to have two separate applications. So you would need to apply to LECOM in Pennsylvania, and you need to apply to LECOM in Bradenton, and that's just something that you designate on ACOMAs. You just list both on your application. You have to list every campus, or else you won't be considered for every campus. And then it's completely different applications, so you could get accepted, for example, into LECOM Bradenton, but not be offered an interview by LECOM in Pennsylvania. So again, it's going to be completely separate processes. It's going to be a completely separate application. There are going to be different committees that are looking at you. So just because it's under the same name, it still is completely different. So you want to treat it completely different. So you are going to have two secondaries and so on for that school specifically. So now looking into the course pack materials, make sure that you guys are still keeping up on the other stuff. So we're not going to do a full lecture on veterinary and dentistry again, because we actually did that before spring break ended, or spring break began. So if you weren't in class then, make sure that you guys are paying attention to the review and reading through that in the course pack, because we're not going to do a complete lecture on them again, because we already did that. So osteopathic medicine, some of you guys might know, some of you might be familiar. Some of you, like how I was when I started this course, I kind of heard of it, but I didn't really know what it was. I just knew that doctors could be a DO or an MD. But osteopathic medicine is the study of the whole body, which they really place an emphasis on the musculoskeletal system. And so this all started with Andrew Still, who was an MD. And after he lost his family, he lost his 3 children to meningitis, he wanted to better understand the body. So he became the father of osteopathic medicine. So if you guys are interested in applying DO, make sure you guys know about Andrew Still just a little bit, because it didn't happen to me personally, but I know that students who applied DO, they got questions on Andrew Still. So just make sure you know Andrew Still, he's the father of osteopathic medicine. So again, with osteopathic medicine, their main thing is understanding the musculoskeletal system, how the body works, very whole body approach to medicine. And so what you'll hear a lot when it comes to osteopathic medicine, it's a big keyword that is really hot now in admissions and all of that, which is holistic. So osteopathic medicine, they really have an emphasis on a holistic approach to medicine. And so you'll often see that osteopathic physicians like to resort to more natural ways to approach medicine. Or, and what I'm saying by that is that if surgery isn't needed, they'll try something else first. If a medication isn't needed, they'll try something else, a more natural remedy first. And so that's something that really drives osteopathic medicine, and something that, attracted me, and I'm sure attracts a lot of you guys. So with that being said, that does not mean that osteopathic physicians cannot do surgery and cannot prescribe drugs. That's not what that means. It's just that they're trained in philosophy that when those options aren't necessary and there are other options, you should take those instead. So as you can see, at the very last sentence in that first paragraph, osteopathic medicine covers all phases of allopathic medicine, including surgery, prescribing drugs, all that. So they still can do surgery. They still can prescribe drugs. Make sure you guys understand that they still can do those things. So one thing that's going to be really different about the curriculum is that in allopathic curriculum, they're not taught OMT. So OMT is osteopathic manipulative treatment. And so that's how they use their hands to manipulate the body to heal the body. So for example, when we're again talking about the differences between the training of osteopathic and allopathic medicine, whereas an allopathic physician might have been trained that if someone has wrist pain, for example, you should prescribe painkillers, and if that doesn't work, then you should do surgery on the wrist. The osteopathic physicians have another tool in their toolbox, which again is OMT. So they can see a patient presenting with pain in their wrist, for example, and decide to do OMT on that wrist, which could help reduce the pain or completely eliminate the pain and solve the problem. And so they have that other, again, I like how people describe it as a tool in their toolbox. So they can do anything that an allopathic physician can do, but then on top of that, they can do OMT. So a lot of osteopathic programs really are driven towards primary care. You don't have to want to do primary care in order to be an osteopathic physician. You can specialize. It's that you'll see a lot of programs when you start looking into DO programs, a lot of them do have an emphasis on primary care. And usually from, my experience and what people usually notice, it usually is those who seek out osteopathic medicine that kind of have that drive to serve the underserved and rural population. So that's a common theme that you see along DO programs. But again, you don't have to do primary care. It's just that there are a lot of DO programs that's their emphasis. They're training primary care physicians, and so usually the students that go there already, know that they want to do primary care. But just keep in mind that you can do whatever you want. So as an osteopathic physician, you can become a neurosurgeon, you can become a dermatologist, ophthalmologist, it doesn't matter. So you can do any of those things that an allopathic physician can do. So there is no residency that an MD student can do that a DO student can't. And I think we've already mentioned it back when we were talking about allopathic medicine, but actually this past year was the first year that those residencies actually merged. So recently on the 20th, there was match day for the MD students. So you can go and look at all the MD programs and see how they match and how their students, what specialties their students got into. And so in the past, those are two separate processes. So the DOs would apply to their own residencies and the MDs would apply to their own. But again, because they really are the same exact thing, they have made the smart decision and the right decision to merge those two residencies. So this past year was the first year that DOs and MDs were applying to residencies just in general, not if they're MD or DO. That didn't exist this year. So that, again, is a step in the right direction. Something that does get taken into account is those step scores. Remember how we were talking about with allopathic medicine, they had USMLE step 1 and step 2. And like we told you guys before spring break, USMLE step 1 actually recently became pass-fail. So now it's a pass-fail test where USMLE step 2 still has a score. For DOs, they're not going to take USMLE step 1 or step 2. They have their own board exam, and that is called COMLEX. So COMLEX. So that is going to be the board exam that DO students take. So they take COMLEX Step 1 after their second year and COMLEX Step 2 after their fourth or during their fourth year. So exactly the same timeline that we talked about all the way back in the beginning. If you want to look back at that chart to kind of get a refresher, it's going to be exactly the same. Just replace USMLE with COMLEX for the DO students. And so one strategy that DO students do is they'll actually take both. So you aren't required to take both. You don't have to take both. But something that DO students have done in order to make themselves kind of stand out in those residency committees and make sure that they know that they're at the equal training as MD students is they'll take both COMLEX and USMLE. So remember what we were talking about with the difference in curriculum. The difference in curriculum between these two is OMT. So you can deduce from that what is going to be the difference between the USMLE and COMLEX. And that difference is going to be that COMLEX has questions on OMT, but USMLE does not. So that's why a DO student can still take USMLE and do very well, whereas an MD student, they would have to kind of study more because they weren't trained on that OMT. So that kind of what makes it equal for residency. That's how they've been able to stand out. But again, like I just told you guys, they just changed USMLE Step 1 to pass fail. So we're still going to have to see in the years that come how that kind of works. And it'll be interesting to see if COMLEX Step 1 now becomes pass fail as a result. So it's just kind of, we'll see. By the time you guys are applying, it'll all be figured out. So it won't really affect you guys. So again, nationwide, 57 different locations because there's 37 colleges, and then again, those 20 branch campuses. Again, and LECOM is a branch campus. And then before we completely move on from the kind of curriculum and talking about all of that with osteopathic medicine, keep in mind that LECOM is problem-based learning. So if you remember all the way back to when we were talking about allopathic medicine, those 3 different curriculums that schools follow, it's either, traditional, integrated, or problem-based learning. LECOM is problem-based learning. So you still do have lectures, but the majority of your learning is going to come from being broken up into groups and you learning from that way. So I think I kind of explained it when we're talking about allopathic medicine, but just again to recap. Again, if you go to LECOM as an osteopathic medical student, you would come into class or break up into your group and they would give you a case. So they would tell you, 47-year-old patient presents with pain in the lower right abdomen, whatever the case is. And you would have to work with your group to kind of start brainstorming and figure out, okay, well, what anatomy is there? What physiological issues do we know that can happen there? And you would kind of brainstorm with your group, different causes and things like that. And then you'd come back the next day. And then that day they might give you some lab tests. So you might have thought it was an infection of some sort. And then they give you the lab test and you notice that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with all of the different immune cells yet, probably not. But to keep it simple, they might show that all of those cells are normal, which indicates there isn't an infection. So now you guys kind of cross off that diagnosis off your lips and you keep working and trying to figure out what's wrong with the patient. And then I believe after a few days, they finally tell you what was the diagnosis. And then you guys learn through that way. So for example, if someone was like, oh, it's appendicitis, and someone else doesn't know, well, where does that pain present? What would you do to treat appendicitis? What medications? What surgery is it? Things like that. That's how you learn. So you learn through each other. And so for those of you guys who are interested in applying to LECOM, definitely make sure you watch that osteopathic presentation because that was a representative of LECOM. And make sure you guys, as always, are staying involved in your student organizations. Make sure because, for example, with AMSA, we had a representative from LECOM, I believe in January, come out and speak to us. So make sure you guys go out to those and hear from the school specifically because that is something you definitely want to emphasize in your interview. You want to make sure that you're emphasizing on your application, things like that, how you really thrive in that setting, because that's obviously a really big thing for their curriculum. So some of you guys are probably thinking, okay, we're talking about this manipulation, how they have the OMT and they're able to manipulate the body. Well, what's the difference then between a DO and a chiropractor? So I know that we haven't talked about chiropractic medicine yet. That's going to be in the next module, but I think we mentioned it before, how DOs, yes, they have OMT, and keep in mind that they can manipulate the entire body. A chiropractor cannot manipulate the entire body. They can only manipulate the spine. So they couldn't manipulate your wrist or your ankle or anything like that, whereas a DO can. And then another big difference is going to be that chiropractors cannot perform surgery and they cannot prescribe drugs. So once we go into chiropractic medicine, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just to kind of give you a little bit of insight, because I know that's a question we get a lot. Just make sure you remember that DOs, they can do surgery, they can prescribe drugs, and they're not limited to which area of the body they can manipulate. So another big thing that you'll often hear described about with osteopathic medicine is how they have a full body approach. And so you'll hear a lot that MDs kind of are trained to treat the symptoms. So when they see that there's a pain, they will prescribe painkillers and things like that just to treat the symptoms. Whereas the DO philosophy is more to understand the root of the cause and why that pain is occurring and how does it affect the entire body, and to really solve the problem itself instead of just alleviating the symptoms. So that's something that you'll hear about a lot. And I know we keep talking about OMT and how it can be really helpful, but just keep in mind that it can take multiple sessions of OMT. Just one manipulation might not alleviate the problem and solve what's going on. It might need to be a series of OMT sessions for you to be able to get results. So that's completely normal. And another thing to keep in mind is that, again, it seems like there's always this battle, which is wrong, of DOs versus MDs, because they are completely equal. Just keep in mind that you have definitely been in the hospital, or your loved ones have been in the hospital, and they have either been treated by an OMT or an OMT was on their case in some way. So the odds of you already having been treated by a DO and not even noticing are very high. Whether, you could have just been in the hospital and there was doctors wandering around and you thought they were MDs, and they could have very well been DOs. You cannot tell the difference because, again, they can do whatever specialty they want to do. There really are no limitations. So that's something that I really want you guys to understand, that becoming a DO is in no way a limitation when comparing to an MD. So like we talked about with the curriculum, again, this is going to be a 4-year program. So just like a lot of the other programs we're talking about, it's going to be 4 years. And then those first 2 years, again, if it's a traditional curriculum, those first 2 years are going to be the basic sciences, sitting in lectures and things like that. And then the 3rd and 4th years are going to be rotations. So that's, again, similar to the allopathic rotations, where you have to rotate on psychiatry and OB-GYN and surgery and all those different things, to get exposed to all the different kinds of medicines and figure out what you want to do. And then again, LECOM is problem-based learning. So it's still going to be 4 years, but those first 2 years, instead of being in lecture all day, every day, you are going to have a lot of problem-based learning sessions basically every single day. And that's going to be where you mostly get your learning from. And then if you guys don't remember, because I know it was a long time ago, keep in mind that the schools that are problem-based learning, you'll see that they are at school for a lot less time than schools that are traditional, because instead of lecturing from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., they might have a lecture on Mondays only, and then on Tuesday, Wednesdays, whatever the case is, they do their problem-based learning sessions for maybe 2 hours, and then they have to go home and do research into the case, and that's how they learn. So it's really interesting. And then again, like we were saying before, key difference between MD and DO curriculums is DO curriculums are going to have OMT. And notice that OMT courses are taken in every single year of the DO student curriculum. So not only in the first 2 years, but all 4 years, you're going to be taking OMT courses. So keep that in mind. So even when you're doing rotations, you're still doing OMT. And then for, again, going back to Nova, how they have an MD and a DO program, something to show you how equal these two careers are is that for Nova, how it works is the DOs and the MDs actually have class together. And then at the end of the day, when they finish lecturing, the DO students stay for maybe an hour, whatever the case is, and they do OMT, where the MD students go home for the day. So they're getting exactly the same education, It's just the DOs then have that extra time every week to learn OMT. So again, this is just talking about how those first 2 years, again, is going to be more learning the basic sciences. So COMLEX, just like USMLE, COMLEX is going to be focused on the basic sciences. And then COMLEX Step 2 is going to be focused on the clinical rotations. So same thing as USMLE. Again, it's just COMLEX is going to have OMT on it as well. So just to show you guys how advanced OMT is, it's not just kind of this voodoo, kind of this, they're not like these people, singing kumbaya, thinking everything is all natural, there's no need for surgery and all of that. OMT can be very, very specialized as well. So if you are someone who is really interested in OMT, then you can have some different routes to take. So you can do a 2-year program in neuromuscular medicine, things like that. You guys don't have to have this memorized for test purposes or anything, but this is just to show you guys how advanced it is and how if it's something that you're passionate about, you can definitely continue training in OMT. So some of you guys might be listening to this and being like, well, I was interested in osteopathic medicine, but I'm not really interested in OMT. Or maybe you're worried, what if I find out during school that I don't really like doing OMT? Keep in mind, again, what I've been saying a million times, it's just another tool in your toolbox. So if you go to a DO program and you do your residency and all of that, and now you're practicing, if you don't like to do OMT, then you don't have to do OMT. Because again, you can still prescribe medications, you can still do surgery, you can still treat people without doing OMT. So keep that in mind. If you don't like it at all, it's not something that you enjoy doing, you don't have to do it. I remember one of the surgeons in the surgical internship, he's an osteopathic, or not, yeah, he's an osteopathic physician, and he's an orthopedic surgeon. And I asked him if he does OMT, and he said no, he hasn't done it since I think early residency or something like that. So you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it is, again, an option whenever you see fit and you feel like doing it, you think it's appropriate for the patient, something you can do, but not something that you have to do. So now for the entrance requirements, I know this is what we're always stressing about as pre-meds, the GPA and MCAT and things like that. And so remember how we were talking about how the big buzzword around osteopathic medicine is holistic. So they're really training you in a holistic approach. They also look at their applicants holistically. So when you're applying to osteopathic schools, they are more likely, when compared to allopathic medical schools, to give someone a chance, for example, that has a lower MCAT or a lower GPA. So you'll notice with osteopathic schools, they have a little bit of a lower GPA. Again, it's not going to be easy. So if you remember back when we were talking about allopathic medicine, we were saying it's, we want to be around that 3.7 GPA. When it comes to osteopathic medicine, you can be competitive with a 3.5. And then again, with allopathic medicine, we said you really want to shoot for that 5.10 MCAT. For osteopathic, a 5.05 MCAT would be considered competitive. So just again, a reminder, disclaimer that we always give when we give you guys this information is that every school is different. So these are national averages. So there are some osteopathic schools that have a 5.08 average, for example, or 3.7 GPA average. So make sure you guys are looking at those programs specifically, because those numbers that I just gave you, those were just national averages. So something to note is that technically a bachelor's degree is not required for osteopathic colleges, but that's, again, we have to say they're not all required, but by some schools it is required. So you guys should go ahead and get that bachelor's degree anyways, but technically it's 90 semester units that is required, but make sure you guys just go ahead and get that bachelor's degree because it's only some schools don't require that bachelor's. So the prereqs are going to be the same, the biological sciences, so biology 1, bio 2, general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics. All of those are going to be exactly the same prereqs that we've been talking about this whole time. For the letters of recommendation, you can still use the pre-health, pre-law letters packet. And so just when you're applying for the letters packet, you would just indicate that you want to apply to DO programs as well as MD programs, or DO programs only, or MD programs only, whatever your situation is. And then remember what we always say, you want those 3 letters from professors, and then you want 2 of those to be science professors, 1 to be non-science, and then keep in mind those 2 character letters. Remember what we have been telling you guys this whole time. One of those character letters needs to come from someone who is a practitioner in that field. So if you are applying to DO programs, you really need to have a DO letter. So that means if you are applying to DO programs and MD programs, you need to have a DO and an MD letter, because you want to have an MD letter go to your MD programs and a DO letter go to your DO programs. So it's something really important. And so when we say that, a lot of students usually ask, well, then who should I shadow? Because I need a DO letter and I need an MD letter. So you can list that shadowing in either of your applications that you have shadowed both. Just if you are able to have some more hours for your MD programs and submit those to that application and some separate hours for your DO programs, that would be ideal. So if you can get completely separate hours, obviously that's ideal, but might not be possible based on your connections and obviously time that it takes. But just make sure, again, having that letter is really important. And then keep in mind you can shadow both. So you are able to shadow both an MD and a DO and list it on either application. That's not something that's going to hinder your application. But if you are able to, for example, have 120 hours of DO shadowing and then just maybe add 1 allopathic position that you shadowed, and then have a separate, kind of like 120 or whatever the number is of shadowing an allopathic position, and then maybe you can list one of the DOs there on your allopathic applications. Just again, it's that strategy, making sure you're not casting any doubt, because if you are applying to DO programs and you've only ever shadowed 1 DO for 20 hours and shadowed MD physicians for 200 hours, that is kind of might make them doubt, like, well, do they want to be a DO or are they just applying to our program as backup? Because again, those requirements, they are a little bit lower, but keep in mind that those aren't easy to get. A 505 and a 35 are still not easy to get. It's just that they are more willing to allow to look at lower scores, lower numbers, because they are more understanding, more holistic. So they might rather have someone with a 3.5 that has dedicated a lot of time to serving free clinics than someone who has a 4.0 and only does school. So again, it's just that holistic application. So you want to make sure you definitely have a DO letter so that they know that you're serious about becoming a DO. And again, when we're talking about degrees and majors, it can be any degree, it can be any major that you want. It doesn't matter as long as you do the prereqs. Then for selection factors are going to be pretty much the same. They might be a little bit more lenient on research, just again, because how the philosophy is. First of all, most of them are mostly involved in primary care. A lot of them aren't really research-based schools, but if you are able to do research, that's definitely going to help your application stand out and be competitive. So definitely take advantage of any research opportunity that you have. Again, with shadowing, just make sure you're shadowing DOs. Make sure you're being strategic. If you're applying to both MD and DO programs, make sure you're applying both and things like that. With leadership and things like that, remember how we're always saying how being a director of a club is really important. Well, not important, but it's important to get leadership. So that's a really easy way to get leadership. If you're someone who's applying to both MD and DO, a good strategy for you would be to become a director or an e-board member of a club that encompasses both of those. So whether it's something like AMSA, which is MD and DO, or something like MAPS and PPMS, which is a bunch of different careers, that would be my suggestion and something that you can strategize with. Because, for example, if you are the president of the Osteopathic group, so pre-SOMA, that looks great on your DO applications, and it still does look good on your allopathic applications, but then they might be wondering, like, oh, why did you become the president of the osteopathic club if you're applying to allopathic medicine? So if you guys see what I'm saying there. So just being strategic with that. So for finances, it's going to be pretty much the same. So it's going to cost a lot, like we've been talking about. But again, don't worry about that for now. Focus on applying or just focus on your application and getting ready for your application. Don't worry about tuition and things like that just yet. You can worry about that later. One thing that I will tell you guys though is if you're applying osteopathic schools, make sure that you have a little bit more saved, or you're able to have just more to spend on your application. Because one other thing that, because I applied both MD and DO, so you guys, if you have any questions on that, you guys can always ask me. I'm always here to help you guys out and figure out, you know, what's best for you. So if you have questions on applying to both and managing both, you can ask me. I'm always here to answer your questions. But one thing that you'll notice is that MD programs, when you get accepted, you do have to pay a deposit. And so that would be, usually it's like $100-ish, $120 that you have to pay to secure your seat in the class. So once you get accepted, you have to pay a deposit to secure your seat. So again, with allopathic programs, it's usually around $100. But for osteopathic, it's a lot more. So for when you get accepted to DO programs, you'll see schools that ask for like a $2,000 deposit. So it could range like $1,000, $2,000. So just make sure that if you are applying to both, you're being strategic. Try to make sure that you have enough saved. Obviously, it's a great thing if you have a bunch of acceptances, but there are definitely cases where students have a lot of acceptances and they aren't able to pay, understandably, you know, $2,000 to a bunch of different programs just to secure a seat. So make sure you're being strategic with your application. Make sure that, again, that comes down to if you are already accepted to one school, you know you don't like that other school, not only are you giving that chance to another student, but that's obviously now a deposit that you don't have to pay if you decide not to hold your seat there. So that's just something that I wanted to let you guys know about, because I don't think it's something that people really told me about in advance. I had heard of it, but I didn't know that that was so prevalent among DO schools. So again, just making sure that you guys are being strategic, not just with your application on your extracurricular side, but remember not to apply until you're ready. That's kind of what I'm getting at, because it does cost a lot to apply. That's what we were talking about with allopathic medicine. And then if you're applying to osteopathic schools as well, just keep in mind that those deposits can get pretty high. I don't think it's for every single school, but it is something that is more common among osteopathic schools. And then in allopathic schools, they don't have deposits that high. So again, the MCAT's going to be required. That 505 is considered competitive, but again, nationally, that's not for every single school. So I think that's pretty much it with osteopathic medicine. If you guys have questions, you can send me a message or email me, whatever you guys want to do. And then again, we're going to try to do a live review on Thursday if I can figure it out. I'm so new at Zoom. I don't know if I'm doing this right. But on Thursday, I'll try to do a live review at the time of our normal class so that you guys are able to ask questions during the Zoom meeting. And then, as always, at the end of this little section, you can read about the different programs, so the different locations and things like that. So I will see you guys or talk to you guys on Thursday to review the information for the exam. Don't forget, you can already start working on those quizzes. So again, there's 3 different quizzes: osteopathic, dentistry, and veterinary. Those are going to be due March 30th at midnight, but you can already start working on them. If you guys have feedback for how this class went, please let me know if you have anything that we can improve on or anything that you liked or didn't like, so that we can fix it by the next lecture, because we still do have quite a few lectures before the semester ends. And so again, email me if you guys have any questions, but if not, I will see you guys or talk to you guys on Thursday.